Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to another segment of Straight Talk with Grover Thornton. This program is designed to inspire, inform, and educate you about how our government, state, local, and federal, impact our lives. This program is under the auspices of our black media, Mr. Julius Hall, President and CEO. Before I get into the articles and issues of this program tonight, I'd like to take this moment to give Mr. Hall some accolades because the shows that he always have on the internet are shows that inform people, as our folks stated, this program does. And say this about him, that I'm so grateful because this is the only media that's allowing the people to know what's going on in Savannah. We just not like we were back during the 60s, where issues that were affecting black people, like housing and employment. I don't have anything what's going on with those two particular issues. People speaking out, looking into areas of black folk being trained for jobs, other than we be just consumers, but we want to be able to work into the labor market and better ourselves and our families. And that's what our representatives are supposed to do, is to speak up for us. And I just want to give Mr. Hall those accolades because we're not hearing anything. And I try to stay involved in everything, always have been. And I'm just not too much satisfied until I know we're really doing things. What about the crime rate? Is this increasing or decreasing? If it's increasing, what are we doing about trying to stop this pipeline of our young people destroying themselves? And I often say this with dealing from a religious point of view, and what the Word of God says, like in Proverbs, the 31st chapter, it says this, and the 8th verse. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. This is the greatest country in the world. But when I saw on the TV the other night where some people are living in these shacks and not only black folk, but white folk in the Appalachians, all these places where they show Bobby Kennedy in the 60s, went to these places. It's just awful to think that people live like animals in the greatest country in the world. And the greatest country in the world has two major problems that I'm confronted with, and so are you. And that is racism and poverty. The greatest country in the world, we got poverty. The greatest country in the world, with the exception of what President Obama did to bring in national health insurance, and Republicans tried over and over and over and over and over and over again to dismantle that program. They sure don't care anything about poor people. We're way behind at this time with England and France and other countries of the Western world. They had national health insurance, and we didn't have this, the greatest country in the world. Now, you can say what you want to say about the communists, about China. You can go back and read history. When Mao Zedong was taking over China, when they had this revolution, China was a backwards nation 50, 60, 70 years ago. And look at China today. Because what Mao Zedong did was put in a 5-year program, tough, and brought that nation up. And that's one of the leading countries in the world. In fact, we owe China so much money. China got so much of control in America because we import more than we export. And so I like to say that this country can do better healthcare. And why would the Republicans want to try to bring down healthcare? And why, instead of trying to make the United States a great nation, like we around here say the greatest nation in the world, and you're trying to keep citizens from voting. And when you read history, the thing that happened to black folk, which we would talk about tonight when we get to certain points. But first thing, I like to just have a few words to speak about what's going on with the national news for a moment. with that disgrace for Donald Trump, a man who's been impeached twice. Never had this happen in the history of the world. He's already been indicted 3 times. Now he's threatening people, and the judge has already warned him the other day. Certain things he cannot say about what's in the transcript that will be going in the trial. He is saying these type of things, threatening the DA, Mr. Bragg, saying ugly things about the judge, the lady who will be here in the trial. She does not play, and she's tough. And of course, now he's going after this lady in Atlanta, Miss Willis. Now the fact of the matter is, talk about she going with some man that she represented when she was the DA and all that. That has nothing to do with her job. That has nothing to do with what she's supposed to do and try him for what he did. He wants everybody to take the blame for what he cannot stand up like a man. It really made me angry when I heard him say about the late John McCain, because the man was a prisoner and he refused to be released by his captors. He said, "Oh, I can't call a man a hero when he's been captured." And for 5 times he got out of going in the military. He's a coward. He has no character, and I can't understand how 37 million people, what is wrong with them? Want a man who's a cult. Want a man who got no decency for women, grabbing women out of the privacy and all of that. He's just a terrible animal. That's what he is. And call the man, Mr. Bragg, an animal. Who wants him president? That man has to be eliminated in some kind of way. And I was shocked to read, well, I didn't bring my Constitution in here with me, but Section 3, I know. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment talks about anybody who betrays the country, anyone who, whether they're president, youth, or president, high officials, and start naming some state representative, anybody against the Constitution for insurrection, cannot hold any office. And I understand today some organizations are going to file a suit in the court to see whether or not they can stop him from being the president, because he's a disgraced person. He's absolutely disgraceful. We don't need him to represent the state. What kind of example is for young people? Because he lost. Well, when you look at the fact that Nixon lost, he against the Kennedy, he didn't try to say the election was rigged, even though they did say there was some mishandling some situations in Chicago, but they never was able to come out with the facts. But anyway, Nixon did not rebel. He graciously accepted the loss and unified behind the man who won. Look at Al Gore, he lost to Bush with those hanging chads and all that mess, from one thing to another. But he lost very graciously. Look at Mrs. Clinton. Mrs. Clinton lost to him very graciously. So he wasn't the only person that lost. Look at Jimmy Carter, lost to Reagan very graciously. Only him. He's the only one who's the only animal that's been going for the presidency. He's no example for no president. And then he loves Putin so. What made me so angry with him when he said one time he praises Putin over President Obama. You go praise an enemy man over your own president. And yes, it was silly people. It's a cult. He has a cult. That's what he has. He's wrecked the Republican Party. I get people like Eisenhower and Jarvis, if they could come back here and see what he did to the Republican Party, they would drop their heads. He's a disgrace. We don't need a man like that running the country. We do not need him at all running our country. But so many of them ignorant people. Now they got him for leading that stuff on the Capitol. And they got him on tape. Find me 1,780 votes. And now he's mad with the lady in Atlanta, the Attorney General. She will bring in a trial against him next week. I guarantee she's going to indict him. They just said if he's in jail, he's going to run the presidency. Now let him get out of hand. That judge, she's already done told him what she's going to stand for and not stand for. So let us just move forward to get rid of him. We need to get rid of him. He's not an example for our nation. And of course, our nation has enough bad stuff about it running around the world, talking about democracy, and we couldn't even vote. It's a shame and a disgrace. But all these walls are falling down. These barriers are falling down, and they're trying their best to institute them again. They're trying to bring them up to existence. And we can't allow that to be going on. We have to take a stand. Now, next thing I want to talk about was there's a magazine with Miss, waiting for Miss Natalie. She's coming. I want to talk about it. Last week I had 3 magazines I showed, only 2 of them. I showed one because one of them I showed, it was about President Kennedy that I had in my memorabilia for so many years. And I have another one that I want to show you, the one that I have right now.
It's on the screen.
Is okay. It was this magazine, the Evidence magazine, that I have written down. I can't see how many years I had on it. I had it for quite a few years, and it was about this lady, Billie Holiday. Sad, a great woman with a great voice, a great singer. She was performing with such leading bands as Count Basie and Duke Ellington, all those people. But she had a severe problem, and she died pretty young. She had a terrible, terrible drug problem. Several times, the FBI and drug people would knock the door down in hotels and stuff where she lived, and she was strung out on all kind of drugs, heroin and all the kind of drugs that really destroyed her. She died at a younger age. She died young, pretty in her 60s, I believe, but she died because of the drugs. And then she had 3 husbands. 2 of them I know were terrible. They mistreated her. And I don't know why some women love men that mistreat them. That's what it is sometimes. The worse the man is, the more they love him. That happens. But that was a very tragic death for this young lady. And she was very outstanding as far as her voice was concerned. And that's what I want to mention, talked about her. Now, I was supposed to have on my show tonight Commissioner Bobby Lockett. So anyway, I have not heard a thing from him about coming onto the show. He said he would do it. I've had members from the council, but never anyone from the county. And I want to know just how black folk in the county are being treated by the county government. Well, you see, you don't have too many problems, I don't think, with the county government because you have more white folk. And, they buckle down the white folk, a lot of them, on things. And I guess the black people, they'd be able to benefit from that. But the fact of the matter is I wanted him on the show because I had some questions that I wanted to ask him so we could get some results and some information from him about the county government. But unfortunately, he's not here. However, I do have in my possession on the show would be Miss Pat Gunn that would try to get an update on what's going on with this square business, which I thought was a disgrace. And I still said the city council did vote to remove that evil man, saying that slavery was not a bad thing, but it was a good thing. Well, this is what get me. It's easy for you to say that unless you walk in somebody's shoes. I remember reading one time the guy was being executed, and the sheriff people who put him in the chair, getting ready to lock him on down on the bench in the chair at that time. And before he went in there, one of the guards said, "We wish we were privileged." It's not that bad. He said, "How you know? You never sat in that seat." So for some white people to talk about slavery, they have never been in slavery. They have never been misused or abused like these people have been. Or that Tubman lady, her master was so cruel to her, took advantage of her in every way you could think, rape and everything else, and just was really cruel to her. And her husband was a free man, and even though he was a free man, he would not let her help her to escape. And she finally escaped, and she wound herself up in the woods. But she remembered her daddy taught her to look up in the sky at the dipper. And that dipper always pointed north. And that's how she was able to work her way up to Philadelphia. And she came back and brought so many slaves to freedom. that they even had the fugitive slave law that was passed. If you caught uh, supporting a slave and hiding a person out like that, you're subject to terrible harassment and jail time. But she kept right on with the Underground Railroad and brought a lot of people to freedom. So is Ms. Gunn on? Has she been connected on? Ms. Gunn, how you doing this evening?
Doing well, Mr. Thornton. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. I'm so glad you called me earlier today because I wanted the public to get a insight to what's going on with Square. And I got to tell you, ma'am, I was a little disappointed. I was happy. I know where you started this group, but I was extremely happy when I discovered that the Square was approved by all of the city council members. But then I became very disenchanted when I found out that the mayor or somebody want to open it up for other names. I mean, nobody thought about that square until you and your group stopped about it in the first place. And then I want people to understand that that is a cemetery. That is a cemetery where black slave people are buried. And they put a racist man like that and name a square after him. If Jews were planted in there, would they name it after Adolf Hitler? Would they put in those terrible people like Goring, terrible people like other German leaders? Would they put a square and name that after them? So I was so glad that the city government did remove it. Now you give us update. Let me ask you one thing: is this true or false? And so I'm so glad you on the show that the listening audience can hear you yourself. Is this true or is this a fallacy? That even though his name has been moved away, that somebody want to put a marker that it wasn't named for him originally. That's true or false?
Well, at this point, it's false because there were 14 names submitted, one pulled out, so now we have 13, so it's too late for a process like that. We did hear a rumor that they were going to submit his name again, but it did not happen. But they could have someone could have submitted his name as an individual citizen. We have names that are competing with us, like George Lyle, W.W. Law, Jane DeVoe. There's a veteran, Mr. Carpenter. There's 7 sisters. There are 13 of us that are actually competing for that square's naming. And we had to go through a process of actually going before the Sites and Monument Committee and Park and Tree. And now, less than 10 days from here, on the 24th of August, it will be the opportunity for the mayor and the city council to decide the name of that square. Of course, we want it to be Susie King Taylor. It will be the first time in 140 years that we have had an opportunity to vote for an African American square, and it will be the first time for a woman named Square. So we are competing. The process has been very strenuous. We started out in 2020 in April by submitting an application solo, and we felt that John C. Calhoun was just not the person to be on top of those graves. There are 2 sets of cemeteries down there, Mr. Thornton. There's a Stranger Cemetery, which is at Calhoun Square, which was whites that were poor, that would come to Savannah and didn't have any money to go home, and so they would bury them there, and some of them are even sailors. And then there is Whitfield Square, named in honor of George Whitfield, the co-founder of the Methodist Church, and he is on top of unnamed enslaved people. And so we initially wanted both of those names to be named in honor of African American symbols. So we wanted the first one, Calhoun Square, to be named Jubilee Square. And Whitfield, we wanted it to be named Sankofa Square. But we did compromise with the neighbors around the square, and they said we want a name. We researched it and found that Susie King Taylor, an enslaved woman in the 1840s, comes to Savannah at age 7. Her grandmother is an urban slave downtown, and she befriends the abolitionist community, and they teach Susie King Taylor how to read, write, and count. they had some clandestine schools. They really did, but none were run by an enslaved woman. So she's the only one that ran it. And so, when the children would go into the houses with their parents to clean these houses around these beautiful squares, they would take cleaning materials inside those buckets, but instead they hid books in there. And Susie King Taylor would slip into a home and teach a child in a basement or an attic how to read, even if it were 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so all over downtown, that's what she did. I did some further research and found out that the governor of Georgia in 1829 passed a local law. Well, actually, it was statewide, and it was basically a law that said no slave or person that was free woman or man of color would be allowed to read, write, and count. So as of 1829, it was against the law. So in other words, Susie King Taylor and all that were engaged could have actually lost their lives, because the sanction was a lot of whipping stations down on the river, and they would be actually beaten for learning. So she took a chance on that for education. 1861, the Civil War starts, and she slips down the river with her uncle and others, and they go down to Fort Pulaski, and they join the Union side of the war. And Susie King Taylor becomes the first African American nurse on the Union side. And so if 100 plus places around the nation have honored her, she's buried in Connecticut. One of our members of our team from the Truth Telling Project actually went there for us a month or so ago and found her burial. I'm so grateful. We think that she should be honored in Savannah. So we've been on a long journey, Ms. Thornton. We're not complaining. What we have done is gathered a lot of people from all walks of life, and we formed a coalition. And something magical has happened. We're now like a family. It's like they're from all walks of life. They're from all hues, professions, retirees, students. And we showed up for 3 years every third Sunday at Whitfield Square. We educated the community as to why Susie King Taylor should be there. And so now people are sending in letters from all over the country and locally to the city council. If you want to send a letter, you can go on our website. It's centerforjubilee.com. And there's already a pre-written letter. You can just upload it and email it. And yes, Mr. Thornton, thank you so much for the advice of getting to the churches. So we printed those letters and we've gotten them into downtown churches. We want to get some more out before the 24th. So we got one more Sunday, and we're asking the churches to circulate it to members to say, yes, we would love for this to be a first name African-American square in honor of Susie King.
That's wonderful. It's a shame that we have to, they automatically did what they wanted to do because they were in power. They took black folk out of position after the Civil War. When the Civil War was over, they came in and black folk was able to get in all these type positions. And as soon as the troops pull out, then of course they disenfranchised black folk. It took them out of office and all this, and all of this been going on ever since. We have to jump through barriers and hoops to remove things that affect us, but they arbitrarily had the power to do what they want to do. So, as I mentioned to you, the black folk, we need to rise up in this city, and let's name this after that lady. Nobody thought about doing anything with that square to move that racist man, other than the group that you were connected with. Let me ask you this question: isn't her name on other squares around the country?
Absolutely. They have squares, they have markers. She's in 125 places around the nation in terms of honoring her. She's also right here in Georgia. She's in Midway, Georgia area. It's called the Isle of Wight. There's the Susie King Taylor Women's Ecology Institute.
Oh, that's good.
We've been supporting them. And so we think she was born and raised in Liberty County, and she came here at age 7. So we think that this should be the second place in Georgia where they should honor her. This is like her second hometown, and we think we should honor her here. And they said, well, it's going to be more difficult to get George Whitfield out of the square because he's the co-founder of the Methodist Church. So why don't you try Calhoun? After all, he's from South Carolina. And so on November 10th, we got a 9-0 vote. I say kudos to the mayor and council. And we want to get 9-0 again. So I think the citizens should become engaged and call your representative and tell them, vote 9-0. Your representative should vote in support of this because we think she's
Well,
worthy.
we thank you for that update because I certainly would like to see that becomes a reality that she does have the right to be there, and I hope she does get there. I mean, all these squares in Savannah, there's not one that named after an African American. Oh, that is disgraceful.
Absolutely.
And
Well, remember the
nothing
website.
happens unless we take a stand. And if we do not take a stand, and we expect for our representatives who represent us to speak out on these issues. You know, when I went to that meeting, when your organization honored me, which I thank you very graciously, and after the meeting was over, this white gentleman, incidentally, I remember there were 3 or 4 white people, I remember that organization that you was chairman of, but when he and I were going out the door after the event was over, and he said, "Mr. Thornton," I said, "Yes, sir." And I shook his hand. I'm glad to meet him. He said, "Why can't we get those Confederate statues out of Forsyth Park?" I just like to know why nobody on city council demand that other places they're doing it. I don't understand Savannah. Now,
Let me share
wait a
what they
minute. Let
said.
me take this right it's on my mind. I'm going to listen to you. Several months ago on national TV, they showed a statue being removed and was the largest one in the country with Robert E. Lee. They have 3 or 4 cranes to bring that thing down. It was so huge. But what happened to people started with the legislators were complaining to get those Confederate things out of Virginia. It was all downtown in view of everybody. Now it's gone. And I wonder why they still here in Savannah. I agree with that white gentleman. Why nobody doing? I think somebody told me one time, you got to do it through the work, the legislature. Well, you in the legislature, bring it up. And not only that, it's the people. The people rose up against it. That's what happened. Those legislators brought it to the people, and the people protested. The people got involved, and it went down. You'll read sometime about the flag. After 1954, I got the article that was in the Atlanta Constitution. That's a long time, but I got it. And it's a tragic to read what happens and who were the ones that said, let's put the bars and take down this other flag and put the bars and stripes on it to rebel against the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court in a country that's supposed to be in a country of democracy. Like Lincoln said, a hypocritical country. That's what it was. He said the people would look at us as we are hypocritical. And that's exactly what America was. That's exactly what America is today. And you take Haiti. Look on that fighting and stuff going on in Haiti. And I thought when Condoleezza Rice was Secretary of State, I said, oh, now we got a black woman Secretary of State. She gonna try to do something by giving some resources down to Haiti. They don't put nothing down there worth nothing. But I guarantee you this, if we had something that America could use, like oil, they'll have no money with more they'll have more money than they know what to do with. There's nothing that can benefit our country. That's why America don't put nothing down there.
Well, what I say to that, Mr. Thornton, is that we must always, always stay awake. When I worked for the American Civil Liberties Union in Atlanta,
which I'm a member,
30 years, the theme was you must be guardians of your freedom. And so
yes.
We can't relax. You must guard your freedom. Our public square application is just a blue ribbon model. If we are asked, and we are all the time, are you going to open up the opportunity for changing of more squares? And I say absolutely not our organization. What we wanted was to simply use this as a blue ribbon model. So in the future, if a young person or an older person or a professor or anyone, a citizen, say, I don't like the name of that school, I want to change it. I don't like the name of that street, then this is the model they can use. And as it relates to Forsyth Park, they're under a state regulation why they can't do any better. And so when we push for this application, for this new process, I do want you to know that the city of Savannah is being sued by an individual who wants to replace it with John C. Calhoun. So it's still there. The city is defending that, but our organization has also filed a lawsuit And this lawsuit is like an intermediary so that we can challenge the entire state of Georgia. And if the judge prevails in our favor, then you will be able in every city in Georgia to now petition your local government to change any square or public space that is offensive. So I think this is a precedent-setting time. I think we have reached a tipping point, and I am glad to be a part of it. I'm telling you that my mother was a cook downtown. Let me share this. My mother was a cook downtown at Wesley United Methodist Church. I would sit in that square waiting for her to get off work, and I would have to go to the store around the corner by Massey Heritage School now, and I would have to write a note and give it to the white person going into the square, asking them to go to that square, to that store, and buy something out of the store because it was 1968 and we were not allowed yet to go into that store. Who knew that 35, 40 years later, we get an opportunity to change the name of that offensive square? So I'm so honored, and we're just.
Well, I'm so glad you came onto the show, and I want to thank you very much. And as we discuss some other things, if you want to make a contribution, you may do so. I am a little disappointed. I thought the county commission representative would be here because there were certain things I did want to ask him about the county. Because as I said previously, all my guests have been from city government. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, this is the month of August. And I want to talk about what occurred on August the 28th, 1963, the March on Washington with Dr. King. Now, there's Dr. King right there, 250,000 people with that march. I can't go into too many details about the march, which I've read, but it takes too much time. But I will say this: was a gentleman by the name of Rusty, was one of the organizers, and of course A. Philip Randolph and a lot of the members of CORE. They put together, and Dr. King, this march. But Mr. Rustin was the man that really did the engineering work to get this accomplished. Now, they thought when Negroes came in 1963, they would go tear up Washington. That was the largest and has been the largest demonstration in the history of this country. Everything was beautiful and peaceful. 250,000 people attended that march. And there's Dr. King right now, where he's speaking. He made his I Have a Dream speech. And of course, it went off beautifully. Even President Kennedy had to make a nice comment how wonderful the race went off, because they had police officers on standby and all that. But they came to demonstrate that we're tired of being second-class citizens in a country that really we built. We built. Like Lincoln said, 250 years of unequated toil, working 250 years. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 2 centuries and a half. It's 100 years and a century. 2 centuries and a half working for nothing. Our foreparents over and over and over and over and over and over and over treated inhuman, second-class citizenship, or the country that's running all over the world, talking about democracy. And in mine, our country be falling down after a while. Rome was a great country. Rome was a great country in the world, but it fell. But it did not fall from invasion. It did not fall because of racketeering by outside influence. It fell from inside. As I first stated, America has 2 great miseries as far as I'm concerned: racism and poverty. Greatest country in the world. We got so many millions of children going to thousands in this city too, going to bed hungry at night. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And never have had a fair distribution of the wealth in this country. Never had. Even Bush had a trickle-down mess. They never had a fair distribution of the wealth in this country. They don't even want to give you $15 an hour. Look how many years, 250 years we work for nothing. They don't want to give a break to African Americans to do anything. Now they're worrying about reparations. Now, reparations got to come in some form. They will have to make some kind of restitution for what they did. When World War II started, they locked up all the Japanese. They put them in concentration camps, called what I call it. They didn't want to give it that name, but the same thing. They didn't mistreat them, but they lock them up. But when the war was over, they gave them reparations. All of them got thousands of dollars. And we have 250 years of working with nothing. You know, when Mitch McConnell said after President Obama, people started talking about reparations, they keep talking about it in the Congress. And he said, well, we've had a black president. In other words, a black president for all that $250,000, 250 years of working for nothing. They're making thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on black people. Free labor. Even Lincoln had to say it. 250 years. No money for your toil. You look up that word in the dictionary, it says make return. He quit it. Make return. They made no return for their labors. So I wanted to mention that about because it's very important. And like I said, when we talk about the March on Washington, Dr. King, then we had the business of the situation in Selma, Alabama, the right to vote. We've had a lot of struggle in this country, ladies and gentlemen. Now there's Selma, Alabama right here now. That happened in 1965 for the right to vote. In Selma, you had more black folk in the city than white folk. And yes, sir, they had a little bit of people voting. They allowed nobody to vote. And Dr. King, they led that demonstration there. And there's the picture will show you where Dr. King, he led the demonstration, but he was not there when they did that. They would have killed him. Jose Williams and one other gentleman, I can't recognize his name right now. John Lewis, that's who it was, went with him to set up the dramatics and everything, semantics, to have the race, the march and do what they wanted to do against the right to vote. And of course, they were beaten by the troops of Selma, Alabama. The police officer, man named was Clark, he was the sheriff, and he made a public announcement on everybody over 21 years old. We need you, every man 21 years, good record, we need you to come down to the city hall. And they deputized those men. They got on horses with these rods that they use to move, make horses do what they want them to do. They beat them, they knocked them down. There's a woman laying on the ground. And that went all over the world. And they called that Bloody Sunday. And President Johnson federalized the troops, and they continued to march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And then Dr. King got into the march. So black folk have been through something in this country. We have been through something, and now they're trying to turn the clock back for the other way. They're trying to take away the right to vote. Look what happened. I have not found out anything yet for the final analysis of what happened, but Alabama drew their line of redistricting. And when they drew that line, they drew the line in which no African American had a chance to win a seat. They had more Republicans in that line that cut off American black people. So the court, they filed a suit, and the Supreme Court ruled that they had to redraw the district, which would give African American a chance to win a seat in that district. So they refused to honor what the court said. I don't know. I haven't heard any final destination, but what happened. But they refused to do it. They have not done it as of last week. I can tell you that, as far as I know. So somebody going to eventually go to jail. They're going to have to do what the court says. So that's the end of that. But we have to continue to fight for everything that we want in this country. It's a shame that we're being taken advantage of like we are. Now they're trying to go back, trying to take history out of the schools. No, they want the white children to think that America was such a sweet, 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 sweet land of honey. No, black folk called hell. Took our children, snatched the children from their mamas, and the children never saw them again. Sold them. go to the flea market. That's what I call it. To buy a woman, good looking woman, and she was a breathing machine. They have babies. It's disgraceful. But that's what happened to black folk during slavery. And I know other folk have been enslaved. The Jewish people was enslaved to Moses under God and let them out. I don't understand how people can be so mean. But I remember, I can't recollect the gentleman's name, but he said racism, and I'm quoting him too. I do have his name in the book. I don't take time to look it up. But what he said was racism is a part of America's culture. It's divisive. It's permanent. And you can believe that. So that's what racism is in this country. They don't want to get rid of racism. I told you there are two things that's very noted in this country, and that is racism and poverty. Racism and poverty. So I wanted to bring that up. And then, of course, now I want to talk a few minutes about voting and how much we must vote to help make the changes. One of the things Dr. King always say was, give us the ballot. That's what made Savannah what it is, ladies and gentlemen. Don't y'all think Savannah was a bed of roses all the time? But I can say one thing, that the white man, I came up during the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, and I remember all of the work that Dr. Gilbert and W.W. Law and Gene Gaston, y'all know anything about these people. Y'all know just ride now, y'all get on the bus, y'all get, go sit in the stores, because eventually all of this uproar over the country led to the passing of the Civil Rights Bill in 64. But we had already integrated downtown before the 64. Because we had that boycott on them, and they find out who wore the clothes and all bought stuff during Easter. But the fact of the matter is this, that even Dr. King came here and said that Savannah was the most integrated place in the South, because the white man and the black man always had a real good relationship of working together in Savannah, even though they took advantage of us now. I don't think we're not going to say that. They took advantage of us right well. Like one of my white friends told me out his own mouth. I had mama say, working with one of the schools that they were helping, her son was, and another young man was helping her get stacking books, accept the new books coming in and assign them to different schools. And one of the boys say, well, Mom, what are we going to do with this what are we going to do with these old books? Oh, we're going to send them to the colored schools. You see? We're going to send them to the colored schools. And they already had that business, the separate but equal doctrine in 1896 under Plessy. That was the man that was arrested because he wouldn't get off the train and give his seat to somebody and go to another coach. And that case went before the Supreme Court. And that was 1896. And that went on from 1896 to Plessy. The man's name was Homer Plessy. And that went on from 1896 to 1954. 80 years at least of tough, separate, but always unequal. And when Thurgood Marshall started with the coach, with the colleges first, and a young man won the right to go to the University of Oklahoma. It was Oklahoma and it was Missouri, one of the two. And of course, they had him separate. You see how stupid the white man was? He was in the same dining room, separate, but he getting the same, but equal. He get the same food, same place, but he's separate. And then, of course, when he got into the classroom, that's where we always had some decent men judges. Now, the next one, I'm going to tell you who three. I can vote one, I can have so much material in my house. I'm going to put my hand on three judges right here in Georgia. It was on the federal court in Georgia. And how they knocked down segregation at the University of Georgia, whatever. But they were so strong on keeping segregation. They had a man in one of the schools. What they did, they put a wall between him and the rest of the class. Say, well, he's getting the same instruction, but it's separate. So he get the same equal thing as a white student. Now, all of this now is supposed to be in a democracy. Hypocritical. And so with NAACP, Thurgood Marshall took that to the federal court. And the judge made him knock that wall down. So what you're doing, you're handicapping him that he cannot exchange ideas with other students, that he could go back to his class and explore with the students. So we've had a long way to go. And like Martin Luther King said in the jail, the Birmingham jail, when he's in the Birmingham jail, I had that on my wall, on a black wall that I had. We showed some of it one time. It's a long article, but I read it about 5, 6 times. And in that article, first thing, the ministers saying that what his march was untimely. In other words, it's not the right time to do this right now. That's just waiting. No. And Dr. King told him, and he asked, when's will be the right time? And he said he didn't usually answer clergy about his work, but he had to do it this particular time. And then in that dissertation in the paper, someone slipped him a paper and pencil, and he wrote that letter to the editor. And he talked about 2 things. First, he talked about a just law and an unjust law. And he said the unjust law was first, let me get the just law. He said a just law is a law that was designed and put into effect by men, but with the moral law of God. In other words, all men are treated equal under God. God is the creator of all men. Just law. And then he talked about an unjust law, was a law that is not in harmony with the just law that God put into this world. And then he talked about how the white man wants us to have, they want to have a false sense of superiority and want me to have a false sense of inferiority. In other words, they want the people saying that they want to have a just thing of superiority. For they had a false sense of superiority, so they want to say, we're superior. So they say I got a false sense of inferiority. They want me to have a false sense of inferiority. I said, no, that's not right. I am inferior. That's what they want us to be. It's a great letter that Dr. King wrote to the newspaper to publish his letter from being in jail. That man went to jail over 30-something times. We can never forget him. But I have this is my view. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But my view is this. This whole world belongs to Almighty God, the creator of everything. The earth is the Lord, and the fullness thereof, and those that join, that are within, belongs to Almighty God. So this is his world. And I look at this. He allowed something to go on so long, and then he has his own way to bring it to an end. When I think about the late Reverend Stale, who was pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church, Reverend Stale says when they would go to the National Baptist Convention and Georgia Baptist Convention, Dr. King's daddy would always take him, and they would go to the Baptist Convention here in Georgia. He would always be the very energetic, speaking, asking questions. And that reminded me of when Jesus was a boy, 12 years old. So Dr. King was born for that purpose. And some people say, well, why would he die? Well, I read an article and people asked the same question. Why would Peter die when he was demanding to go to Rome? And also Apostle Paul said because they had done what God wanted them to do. King did just exactly what God wanted him to do. He created this organization under God's division and mind, and then he activated it and put it into effect. He did what God wanted him to do. And when he had accomplished that, then he lost his life. So Jesus lost his life But in the end, God resurrected him. And today he'll be coming back again quicker than we think. So we have a lot to do as society. We have a lot to do as parents, like I said before. The article I read to you all about a month or two. And I was saying that grandmothers pass on to your children. Our children need to learn their history. You see, they don't want to, in Florida, that Governor Sanders, he's worse than Trump. Who wants a prejudiced man, a racist man to be president? So those two men are evil men, Trump and him. All the 5 men are Republicans. There are many of them. So you got the man from Christie, from New Jersey, former governor. He talk about Trump age and all of that. Well, he weighs 400 pounds. How you know he won't have a heart attack? Overweight. Talk about the policies. What you gonna do to make things better? Republicans have not done one thing since they've been in that office. Not one. But investigation. Biden's son. What Biden's son got to do with Biden? Because Biden has done so many good things. Infrastructure bill, to refine the medicine. People going to have to pay much lower price now for insulin. $300 a month for it. Now it's $35. He brought in the chips. That's to do with all the technology. You got businesses coming back from overseas into the country. 30 months of consecutive high job employment. All these things. And sad to say, his bad foreign policy. What do you mean? Trump took us out of NATO. We lost respect over the world with Trump. Now Biden got the respect back to America. He canceled the dealing with Iran. Biden working with them to stop this nuclear or building out their nuclear capabilities. Biden got that stopped. Now we got to talk to him back on. Senator Kerry went and dealt with these people. Trump turned it down, pull us out. Biden got it back on track. Biden had done a lot of good things. The age got nothing to do with the man's ability. It had nothing to do with his ability. He's accomplishing things. But I'm going to tell you right now what the bottom line, they don't want to come out and say it. I'm going to tell you what it is right now. They worry about if Biden die, get sick where he after dying, then Kamala Harris will be president, a black woman will be the first woman president of the United States. They don't want to come out and say it. So it's, oh, you're racist. Oh, you're racist. That's why you say that. You're president, you're racist. You don't want her to be president because you're racist. But deep in their hearts, as the Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. But they don't want to come out and say that. But that's what they're worried about. But the bottom line is this. This is God's word, and in his own way, he made the changes. But I'm about out of time here tonight, but I want to thank you for listening. And if anybody have anything that they want to ask me about, you can really call me at my phone, 912-925-1034. Now, you know, when the Supreme Court gave a decision, there were 3 things that the decision was. And I talked about the abortion, and I also talked about the student pay. But there was one more they talked about, which I would talk next month about, and I'm going to express my own views. Every man got to judge for himself. But that had to do with when this lady ran some kind of business, and 2 men, same-sex men married, wanted her to make something for them to deal with the wedding, and she refused. So she filed a suit herself. And Supreme Court went along with that lady. So, but what I'm going to do if I live next month, I'm only going to read the Word of God. That's all I'm going to read. And you see whether you're right. I'll see if the Word of God's right. So I'm coming to the end of my show. And I want to thank you for listening. And I hope that I have been able to inform and educate. And next month, we're going to be talking about Black history for our children and what it's doing and what can we do as parents so that they can learn some of these things and respect and appreciate our culture and appreciate what we did for this country. So let us take this time to thank you very much for listening to the show. And I hope that I have been inspired you to really think of some of the things I've said and to pass on to your children the good things about our people and the struggle that we have had to overdo. And we're still rising to accomplish that. So thank you again. God bless you. And good night.
Like this.